Here's a video of Matt Johnson talking about the Sigma 28 to 45. This is a 1.8 lens. I think it's the fastest zoom lens ever made, meaning it has the brightest aperture, the fastest aperture, the shallowest depth of field for a full frame zoom lens. And that's quite impressive from a technical standpoint, from just the optics of it. That's incredibly cool, and I'm glad that it exists. This lens is now a little bit old, so this isn't news or anything like that. You've probably already seen this lens talked about, but I wanted to point out why I didn't buy it and why I don't think I ever will. Maybe that could change, but I just think fundamentally this focal range is not ideal for me. 28 to 45 to 40, 45, that's not what I'm looking for. And I don't know how to say it simpler than that. 28 to me on the wide end is not wide enough. I'd much prefer something at 24, maybe 20 realistically. And at the long end, the telephoto end, 45 isn't getting the job done either. I think it's such a limited zoom range. Those focal lengths just aren't useful for the type of work that I do. I currently shoot a lot with the Sigma 28 to 70, and that is much more useful, but it's a 2.8, so, take that for what you will. And by all accounts, this Sigma, 28 to 45 is incredibly sharp. It's a great lens, and people are saying you can replace your primes, you can do so much with this lens. But I think the hype is just, I don't know, ill-placed. It's a little odd to be excited about something that's 28 to 45, regardless of the technical feat and achievement that it is. Yes, a 1.8, great, very fast lens, awesome. But I would much prefer something like Micro Four Thirds has, which is the Leica 10 to 25. On Micro Four Thirds, that's a 20 to 50, and I find that range far more useful and more practical than 28 to 45. The extra 5 on the long end really doesn't matter that much, but on the wide end, the focal difference between 28 and 20 is dramatic. And I find myself often wanting that 20 millimeter look, the full frame look of 20 millimeters, so 10 millimeters on Micro Four Thirds. And this is kind of my, gripe or irritation with full frame and just the lenses we have these days. Obviously, full frame lenses are going to be bigger, they're going to be heavier to get, those fast apertures that we all love, or, we kind of chase after from time to time. And so it is cool to have 28 to 45, and people will compare it to the classic Sigma 18 to 35, which is an APS-C lens. So there is some equivalent, there is some standard there of, this is familiar for a lot of people. But I think that I'm just much more after something that would be like, my dream lens for a full frame would be a 20 to 50. Once I started using that Leica 10 to 25 on Micro Four Thirds, I just saw the world a completely different way. 10 millimeters on Micro Four Thirds, 20 millimeter full frame equivalent is such a perfect wide angle focal length. Wider than 20 millimeters is a little off-putting, when you're talking about 18 or 16 or 14 or 12 in some cases. It gets ultra wide, ultra distorted, ultra goofy and weird, and I'm just not after that type of look. It certainly works for certain scenarios, depending on what you're doing. You might want to use a 16 millimeter or whatever, but for me, 20 is just such a perfect wide angle focal length. And then obviously 50 on the longer end is a standard for a reason. I mean, everyone starts, I think, with a 15 millimeter prime. And so to have that Leica 10 to 25, I've talked about it an awful lot on this channel, and I was hoping that Sigma would come out with something like that for full frame. However, this 28 to 45 I don't think it gets the job done for me. I like the 28 to 70, and I'm willing to work with it, considering that it comes with a lot of other benefits. So the 28 to 70 is a very affordable lens, all things considered. It's not the fastest lens, but it's a 2.8, and it's incredibly small, lightweight, compact, all those great things that make filming and shooting easier. If you're chasing after the biggest, heaviest, bulkiest thing just because it's the fastest lens, well, I don't want to be limited to 28 to 45. I picked the 28 to 70 for a reason. Even in considering there's, 24 to 70, very common, but much more expensive, bigger, heavier, all those things. So a lens just isn't the optical performance. Yes, at the end of the day, when you're looking at the images, that is kind of what matters most, but it also comes with the trade-offs of what is easy to use, what fits in your budget, and what do you want to use, what do you want to grab. I've bought a lot of lenses over the years that end up sitting on a shelf just because I end up not using them. Maybe they're a specialty thing, a super telephoto or an ultra wide angle, something like that. That's more fun and creative than actually useful and practical. If you want the kind of, the one lens to rule them all, there's also now the 28 to 105 as well. I think that's also a 2.8. So there's a lot of options in this, 28 to whatever range, but I really want full frame lenses, and maybe they're coming. Maybe someone will kind of crack the code on how to make it work. Because if it's possible on Micro Four Thirds, and if it's possible in some regard on APS-C, it should be possible on full frame. It just comes with, different trade-offs, bigger, heavier, all those things that we know come with the territory of the larger sensor. But there's no reason for me why full frame couldn't have a 20 to 50, something like an F2. I think that'd be quite nice. If it had to be a 1.8, so be it, that's fine. Even a 2.8, I think I would actually prefer over my 28 to 70 2.8. So if it came with, having it be a little bit smaller, more lightweight, a 20 to 50 f2.8 on full frame, that's plenty bright for most scenarios and certainly shallow enough for most scenarios. And, if you want to do a specialty portrait with the beautiful bokeh, you can always reach for an 85 prime or something like that and shoot it like a 1.4, 1.2, whatever you desire. But for me, for the general purpose, the value of a zoom lens is to have the one lens I can put on the camera and do almost anything. And this Sigma 28 to 45 doesn't really do that for me. It is impressive. I do appreciate, the 1.8 aperture, but it just seems applied to the wrong focal range. I wish we had better zooms for full frame that reached wider in that 20 mil zone and didn't push maybe as far on the long end, because it is a range. It does come there's optical limitations. I'm not asking for the 10 to 1000 f1.0. That's not what this video is about. I'm not asking for something out of reach. What I really want is for Lumix, hopefully Panasonic, Leica, whoever it might be, to take what they did on Micro Four Thirds with that 10 to 25, that is kind of a big, heavy lens, and take that same focal range and apply it to full frame. What would the full frame version of that lens be? Because we have some beautiful lenses for Micro Four Thirds. Micro Four Thirds has been around for a long, long time. I think is it the first mirrorless system? I don't know if that's technically true, but I think it might be. Micro Four Thirds was the first mirrorless mount. Take the technology, the legacy of that, and bring it to the full frame lineup, especially when you're talking about the L mount. If Lumix were to make this lens a 20 to 50, that would get my money, certainly. And again, it doesn't have to be fast. It could be like a 2.8 or something reasonable that gives you, a balance, a compromise. And if it was optically, beautiful and sharp, just like that 10 to 25 on Micro Four Thirds, I think it'd be a no-brainer for a lot of people. And in hindsight, you would end up looking at something like this 28 to 45 as like a novelty, kind of a gimmick, kind of a quirk. Okay, that's neat. But what's really more valuable is a 20 to 50. And because it's been done on Micro Four Thirds, I think it should optically be possible on full frame. I don't know that for a fact. I'm not a lens designer. I'm not a lens engineer. But when I look at the lenses coming out, this fixation on the 28 millimeter focal length, it's fine. It gets the job done, and I'm willing to work with it. But it does come with so many trade-offs. And if I had better full-frame glass options, I would gladly choose them. Unfortunately, we just don't really have them. 24 is kind of the standard, normal wide end, but that doesn't really get me excited because we've had 24 to 70s since the dawn of time. Not in reality, but they've been around forever. 24 to 70, 2.8, super common. It's just the classic run and gun lens. But these days I'm looking for that slightly wider, the 20 mil on the wide end, and then a little bit less reach on the far end. If it stopped at 50, that sweet spot, it works so well on Micro Four Thirds with that 10 to 25. It's a beautiful lens. It's really expensive. Don't get me wrong. It is expensive, but when it's that useful, when it's that versatile, I think we'd all be willing to spend a little bit more on the one lens that could do so much. And then you could pair it, with a 50 to 200 if that were possible. They right now On Micro Four Thirds, it's the 10 to 25 and the 25 to 50. So I guess the equivalent would be like 50 to 100 or something like that. But, there could be this nice, we got these great lenses for Micro Four Thirds, but we're just missing them still with the L mount and on the full frame, cameras like the S5 Mark II or the S9 or hopefully an S1H Mark II coming. I just think these Sigma lenses, they're cool and maybe they're useful. Maybe you're the type of person that likes a 28 to 45. And if that works for you, by all means, go for it. I just think I'd be more impressed and more excited about something that was just basically a full frame copy of that Leica 10 to 25. I don't know what it is about that lens, but it's the one thing that keeps me kind of hooked to Micro Four Thirds, just because that lens is so useful in so many situations. And it's a great lens, fast, sharp. It's incredible. I used to use the 18 to 35 Sigma for a long, long time with the speed booster. You've probably seen me talk about it if you've been around this channel for a while. There's certainly old videos of me talking about the 18 to 35 with the speed booster. It was the common lens combo on the GH4 and then on the GH5. But once I was willing to invest in that 10 to 25, it completely changed the way I look at content, the way I look at video, the way I look at photo. And it's just so, so useful. And it's something I'm still missing on full frame. Surprisingly, hopefully it'll come eventually, and I don't know who will make it or what form factor it'll come in, and if maybe at that point I'll complain about that too because it's just not quite what I'm after. But I wanted to at least spend some time talking about it because I don't see people talking about it. We kind of get excited for what we're given, but I very rarely see people kind of point out what we would have preferred to have instead. And maybe that's just a blind spot for me. Maybe I don't see these people talking about it, but it's very easy to review gear and say how great it is. But I kind of wish there was more pushback on, and I'm saying that I'm the one doing it. So I'm willing to be that person to say, yeah, thanks, Sigma. Really cool. Great job. You did awesome. However, I'd prefer this other thing instead. And maybe that's entitlement. Maybe that's complaining for no reason. I'm certainly not the one making the lenses, so I don't know what's possible. But I just love the glass that we have for Micro Four Thirds. If you want some of the best glass, some of the most useful zoom lenses, those Leica lenses for Micro Four Thirds are incredible. And I want that same thing for full frame. It'd be really, really nice to have. And so that's all this is. It's just a wish list, a wish video saying, how awesome would that be? And I think at that point, we could chase the next thing. That would be awesome once we have that box checked. But for right now, it just seems like this really big hole in the lens market. We don't really have a 20 to something. And I think that's unfortunate for full frame. Micro Four Thirds, we have it. And it's awesome. And it's great. I love it. But for full frame, 20 to something, 20 to 50, 20 to 60, that does exist. But, in the slow aperture space, which at that point, I don't know what the benefit of shooting full frame would be because that's a whole other can of worms. So if you're going to, I probably took too long in this video to mention the 20 to 60. That lens does exist, but it's variable aperture. I believe it starts at a 3.5 and it's not all that sharp from what I hear. It's more of like your kit lens. I haven't used it myself, but at that point I would just stick with Micro Four Thirds and stick with the 10 to 25. I don't see any value in getting the 20 to 60 when it doesn't highlight the features of full frame that I'm after. So it does need to be sort of fast, like a constant 2.8. That would be a requirement for this dream lens that I'm talking about. 20 to 50. Come on, someone please make it happen.